The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Martina Lyons, and I'm from the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn. Hopefully, most of you know who IRENA is, but in case not, we are an intergovernmental organization with currently 161 member countries and 22 countries in accession. We support countries in their transition to a sustainable energy future, and we serve as the principal platform for international cooperation, a center of excellence, and a repository of policy, technology, resource, and financial knowledge on renewable energy. Our analytical work and our engagement with our members generate a lot of insights, and we are constantly looking for more ways to share those insights with all of you. And that is why we launched a fortnightly IRENA Insights webinar program a few months ago, which means that every other week, presenters from IRENA, from one of IRENA's team, either alone or together with their invited guest, as it is the case today, will share with you key findings from their latest work. We'll offer you insights into opportunities and trends, best practices, but also innovative solutions to address various challenges. A small caveat, we aim to keep these webinars short, circa 30 minutes maximum, so we cannot cover everything. But we do hope to give you enough to decide whether to delve deeper into the topic. And we signpost in our presentations further sources for more in-depth information to help you to do that. So today's webinar, the IRENA Electricity Storage Valuation Framework, will give you an overview of a very recently launched report with the same title. The webinar will focus on how to assess the value of electricity storage for the power system and how to create conducive regulatory frameworks for cost-effective storage deployment. The webinar will feature Heather Worley from the World Bank as our guest speaker, and she will introduce you the Energy Storage Partnership, which is a new international partnership established by the World Bank with over 30 partners, including IRENA, to help expand the deployment of energy storage and bring new technologies to developing countries' power systems. So today's speakers, as already hinted, are Mr. Emanuele Taibi, who is our expert in IRENA on the power sector transformation strategies and a person behind the IRENA report. And our guest speakers is Heather Worley from the World Bank's Energy Sector Management Assistance Program and a person behind the Energy Storage Partnership. Their presentation will be circa 20 minutes long to allow another 10 minutes for your questions. But before I hand over the microphone to Heather and Emanuele, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. Next. So today's webinar will be recorded and available together with the presentation slides on IRENA webinar website. The previous webinar recordings and slides are already there, and we invite you to visit them. The link to the website will be again shared with you in the follow-up email. All of you are currently muted and will remain so throughout the webinar. Next. We would love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have any question for our speakers, please feel free to send it through the question feature that you can find on the webinar panel. We will be monitoring the questions throughout the session and select some to be answered by our speakers. Due to time constraints, we apologize in advance if your question is not answered. You may also download the reports on which this presentation is based on, fact sheets on the Energy Storage Partnership, as well as the presentation slides in the handouts section. If you experience any technical difficulties, please try to reconnect by dialing in via the phone. You can get the number by clicking on the phone option located on the webinar panel. Otherwise, please visit support service on the GoToWebinar website, as the link shows on the slide. So, without any further ado, let me kick things off by welcoming Heather. Heather, over to you now.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's joined. Good afternoon, and thank you to IRENA for hosting this important webinar. I want to thank everybody particularly for joining at this difficult time, because I know for many people this is very difficult, and I hope everyone is well. I want to talk quickly about the Energy Storage Partnership, which, as Martina noted, was launched in June of 2019 at the Clean Energy Ministerial with more than 30 partners. The purpose of this knowledge sharing partnership is to help answer some of the questions that developing countries may have, or some of the specific needs that developing countries may have for energy storage. Next slide, please. When the World Bank launched a few months before the launch of this partnership, when we launched a new investment program for battery storage and energy storage, we realized that we would have, if we were going to invest at the type of scale we imagined, we would have a lot of learning from across different countries, and a lot of knowledge would be built, and we wanted to be sure that we focused on sharing that knowledge in a very efficient and also transparent and open way. So we started to reach out to companies in the private sector, but also to associations, industry associations, some research labs, to ask them, if we were to start a knowledge partnership like this, would this be a good idea? Would you participate? And we were so pleased with the unanimous response, yes. And also, as you can see from this list of partners, we were very honored to have so many distinguished partners from all over the world join us in this knowledge sharing effort. So we are approaching in the next few months the first anniversary of this partnership. And so if we go to the next slide, I will share with you briefly what we're trying to do with this first year. So when we had our first meeting to launch the partnership, we had each of the partners suggest ideas and concepts and learning that needed to happen to get more storage into more developing countries. And we came up with these 7 working groups. And we came up with these working groups together. And this is entirely a voluntary partnership. And you can see that some of the partners are associated with one or more of these working groups. And I'll just quickly go through the working groups so that this audience has a sense of what we're hoping to achieve and what we hope to be disseminating in terms of knowledge in June at our 1-year anniversary. So working group 1, as you'll see at the top, is about power systems safety. We're working on a document that has safe operating guidelines and a section on warranties. We've seen that warranties are extremely important, and so we want to give that the full coverage. And as I go through these, please keep in mind that these documents are dynamic and we will revise them. We want to have output at the first year, but we also know these documents are going to change as the market and the country's response to the market adapts as well. For working group 2, we're lucky to partner with a few research labs and Mazen in Morocco on a test bed for knowledge dissemination and capacity building. We see that this is going to add a lot of value to the market in developing countries, so we're enthusiastic about this one. On the 3rd working group, we have testing protocols and validation of performance. And as you can see, we're working with a distinguished group of partners on this one as well. We expect this to be very linked to the testbed working group as well, so that as we set up these test beds, we know what we're testing, we know what we're looking for, we know how to validate performance, and we can share that knowledge with people in developing countries who are doing the same types of investments. Working group 4 is on flexible sector coupling, and we're working very closely with IEA and other groups on this one. And the working group 5 is on decentralized energy storage solutions, mini grids. And we're working on a document now, and it's a study of the types of batteries that work best for mini grid applications depending on their size and what they're being used for. So we think this will add a lot of value in the mini grid market, which we see is expanding rapidly. Working group 6 is on enabling policies and procurement frameworks. And this is also an important one because we know that without the right policies and without the right procurement approaches, this market could be set back, and we really want to see it expand. And on number 7, the working group number 7, we have a lot of distinguished partners with us there as well, and we're working on recycling systems and standards. We see that this is a very important one for the full life of batteries and for the full, to make sure that the approach that it's being taken in countries is standardized, and safety and end-of-life issues are thought through carefully. Next slide, please. So with those working groups, I just wanted to give a little bit of an update on what the Energy Storage Partnership is doing, and also let you know that you have our contacts there. My colleague Fernando de Cisternes and I are managing this with SMAP at the World Bank. We're sort of the secretariat of this partnership. So I just wanted to give my contacts, and please, if you have any comments on the working groups or you'd like to know more, please let me know. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hi, Emanuela. Floor is yours now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heather, for your presentation, and especially for accepting the invitation to join this webinar. It's great to see how storage is a hot topic at the moment in so many different group of stakeholders. So with that, I will just start before getting into the presentation with a couple of general remarks. So one of the big questions on storage at the moment is what is happening with the current situation. Now, is storage a very important topic still, or we're moving on to the next big thing, such as hydrogen or others? So I think a lot of us have the feeling that storage remains, and it becomes probably even more important today as we see the drop in electricity demand pushing the limits of power systems and needs flexibility way ahead of what was expected over time. But still, it remains a difficult statement to prove. So one of the positives that we can say we've been learning from this webinar so far is that we've been receiving an unprecedented level of registration volumes, with 1,800 people registered as of yesterday and almost 700 at the moment connected, which is quite an impressive number. So everybody is clearly having challenges at the moment, and being so well received on a topic that is relatively a niche topic, if you wish, in terms of volume of investment to date, but still an important topic for the energy transition, is a testament to the importance of this topic today. What is also interesting is that we have registrations from all over the world, from North America, Central America, South America, small island developing states in the Caribbean, Indian Ocean, Pacific, of course, Europe, Asia, Africa. No region is really excluded. And we have academia, government, and private sector very well represented, with prominent names from former ministers to very prominent professors being on the line. So first of all, let me thank all of you for taking the time to be with us today. And of course, looking forward to any questions you might have. What we will do today is just an abstract or a teaser of what we have in our storage valuation framework due to the time constraint, but just to try to cover as much ground as to grids and to demand. So electric vehicles, standalone storage, hydrogen production, flexible demand, more meshed and more smart grids will all play a role to shift the flexibility, the burden of providing flexibility from supply throughout all the power system. So we've been doing work in all of these areas of flexibility, and today we will focus specifically on the role of storage. So our report is divided into 3 parts. It's an overview for policymaker. As the first part, I will give just a general flavor of what is in there, followed by a more detailed part for modelers. And when I say modelers, I really mean to support the quantitative analysis that is necessary to establish the policy and regulatory framework necessary for storage deployment. And then finally, giving some concrete example of what has been happening around the world on storage in recent years and how that could be taken as an example for business cases and policy and regulations for other countries. So first element, why storage for variable renewable energy integration? So we said already solar and wind will represent in our scenarios over 2/3 of electricity generation by 2050. This means that in many times of the year, in many countries, they will be representing at least 100% of the load in a specific unit of time. What that means is that we need to have all the necessary services provided by someone in the system, and that someone used to be mostly supply. This is now shifting away from supply towards demand, given the variability of supply. And of course, a very important bridge to balance supply and demand at all time scales is storage. Storage of any kind. In this report, we focus on electricity storage for a simple reason that when you start coupling storage beyond electricity, so you're going power to heat, power to gas, and you are not able to go back into electricity, that requires, let's say, a cross-sectoral regulatory framework, which is a very important piece, but we wanted to start with the electricity sector here. So if your storage is thermal or is gas, as long as it's possible to bring this back to electricity, then this can be covered by this framework. And of course, all the technologies have a role to play. So if we're talking about inertia, so before even responding, having a system that is slower in moving in terms of frequency, there are technologies already existing like pumped hydro, compressed air energy storage. Once we move to fast frequency response, this is a bit of a newer area that can be provided by, let's say, newer technologies like batteries and flywheels, all the way down to all the grid services that are necessary. And towards the end, of course, long duration storage that can provide not only operational services, but also more, let's say, adequacy services. And storage, of course, can be standalone or co-located with solar and wind. So you can have system benefits from storage, but you can also have project level benefits, such as, for instance, increasing the capture price of a solar PV system by dispatching it when the prices in the system are higher. The storage framework is divided into 5 phases. First of all, we look at identification of storage services that can support integration of variable renewables. So which are the services we are interested into? Second phase, we are mapping the technologies with the services. So which technologies can provide efficiently and cost effectively the services we are interested into? And then we move into the more quantitative part of the framework, where we look at the analysis of the value of electricity storage for a system compared to alternative options. So the narrative is always about flexibility. Storage is one of the sources of flexibility. So the framework is not recommended to go exclusively with a focus on storage, but first of all, to see what is the role of storage in the whole flexibility mix, and then to focus on what is needed to actually get the right amount of storage at the right price deployed into the system. We then move to more of a project level analysis, where we simulate how a project would be operating into that system. And the reason behind that is that very often there is value for storage, but there is very little monetizable revenues for storage projects to be deployed. And so that is one of the issues that need to be resolved and that the framework aims at supporting. And finally, of course, understand if these projects would be viable under the current regulatory framework, and if not, what can be done to address that. As we have very different stakeholders today present in this webinar, I brought back this slide that shows a little bit how the recommendations are different depending who is asking the questions on the relevance of this framework. So what can developers of storage projects be advised to do to really look at the business models that exist from our real cases, and of course engage in a dialogue with regulators and utilities to see what their products or their projects can offer to the system. For vertically integrated utilities, to update the planning tools, and this report tries to provide some suggestion on that. And for regulators to really look at the existing framework and how storage can participate into such a framework, or if necessary, update the framework. And finally, academia, there is a very important role there, as we need to develop more tools and methodologies to make sure that energy storage is properly valued when we do long-term planning. So the second part, very briefly in the interest of time, I will not have much opportunity of delving into the details, but I'm jumping directly to phase 3, so the quantitative part, where we look at essentially doing a capacity expansion, where storage is one of the many alternative sources of flexibility, and then refining that assessment with a production cost model that allows to really understand how storage can provide value in reducing operational costs in the system. And then, of course, the key is to really do first a capacity expansion and then refine that incrementally to find how much storage can provide value to the system, what is the amount that we're looking at. The next step is to simulate how a storage project would be operating into this context. So trying to understand where the revenues could come from if we put ourselves in the shoes of a project owner that is operating into the market. What would be the optimal operation of this system to maximize the revenues, and how that would diverge from what would be expected at system level. And then finally, really focusing on the viability of projects, so that we quantify the benefits, we know the cost. IRENA produced the first report on storage cost a few years ago with a good forecast for the years to come on where storage costs are expected to land. And finally, what are the revenues that a project can access in terms of existing regulatory framework? So understanding that the benefits have to be higher than the cost is the first step. We don't want to have a misallocation of money, but also understanding what is the economic viability gap between project revenues and project cost, and how to make sure that actually revenues exceed costs but do not exceed benefits, so that we don't have missing money, but we also don't have misallocated money. I'll just give one example to close in the interest of time to have some questions. We have 8 examples in which there is a principal use for storage, and this is usually in real life combined with other use cases. So there is a principal use case that is stacking revenues from multiple use cases. Therefore, the idea there is that projects that do a single thing are not likely to be economically viable, but storage can provide multiple services at once, and this makes it viable. So in this case, the provision of operating reserves is an interesting case. It's one of the first cases for a deployment of battery storage into power system recently. And it was pioneered in the UK, where National Grid launched an enhanced frequency response tender that would require 4 technologies that can respond faster than conventional technologies. And majority of this was awarded to, of course, battery storage. Many of these projects providing not only enhanced frequency response, but also black start capabilities for other power plants, and so on and so forth. So they were all multiple purpose, and that's why they came at a much lower price point than expected. And a few of these projects can already saturate specific niche services like EFR, as you can see in the slide. I will jump to conclusion as we're running a bit late with time. So a few takeaway points from our analysis on storage value. It is beneficial for a power system in most cases to deploy energy storage, and it also brings about economic, technical, environmental benefits. This has to be assessed, of course, from a quantitative perspective to be able to set the right framework for it. And of course, also making sure that the viability of projects reflects the value of such projects for a system. And then finally, to apply the quantitative framework that we are presenting here, the idea is really that this is more of a TOR for either consultant or power system experts or academia to really engage and support policymakers and regulators in developing this kind of studies, rather than trying to be an all-comprehensive blueprint, more like a methodology that can be used to develop such frameworks in a way that is objective, verifiable, and of course quantitative providing the insights necessary. And with this, I will just hand it back to Martina for any questions.
Thank you, Heather and Emanuele. What an insightful presentation. But without any delays, let me go directly to the questions. So let me start with this one, which is for Heather. What are the plans for the second year of the partnership? Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And I'm glad you asked that. As I mentioned, we have 7 knowledge products that we're going to be disseminating in June at the 1-year anniversary. And at our next partners meeting, we will also be talking about what we want to achieve in the second year. And we've had some initial conversations about a new training program. And what we'd like to do is spend the second year getting these knowledge products in the hands of as many people as possible. And I think what you can look forward to seeing from the Energy Storage Partnership is a series of trainings. We were expecting to do a 1-week course, a face-to-face course with a site visit for each, to an installation with each course. I think the virus may make this a webinar, which is good. It's nice to see so many people on today. It seems that this format works. So I think the short answer is training. We want to do lots of training with developing countries to make sure they have the how and the why and the what about energy storage in their countries. So training and capacity building. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. I will try to combine a couple of questions together. I think this one is more for Emanuele. So what is the reason why we need a dedicated framework for electricity storage? Are you suggesting that we need to subsidize some particular technologies like batteries? For example, in Latin America, bulk electricity markets are based on marginal costs. Energy storage storages are marginal cost flatteners. So what's the strategy for Latin America? Subsidies, valued as transmission assets? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So I think each market is a different story. So knowing the specific country would really help a lot rather than talking about a regional approach. The main reason to have such a framework is that without taking another look at what storage can provide to the system, in light of the large shares of solar and wind being deployed, most markets don't provide sufficient revenues for projects being deployed. So the idea is to really take another look at what can be done to reduce the cost to the customers, which is ultimately the purpose, while keeping the reliability levels as high as possible. And then really country by country seeing what is necessary in terms of quantity of storage, type of storage, services required. And that really ends up into a market design question. So you have energy, but you also need services. Storage is both demand and supply, but ultimately is somehow a loss. So it's a source of consumption. So you need services, and valuing the right services will be the key to get storage deployed.
Thank you. This one I think is for Heather. Keeping in the spirit of the objectives of the working group, would you be open to storage and optimization companies sharing their knowledge and experience gained with you? Thank you.
Yes, we would love that. And one thing we've been doing with all of the partners meetings, we're meeting twice a year, and the partners agreed twice a year would be a sensible frequency. What we've been doing is we have day one with the private sector, we're calling them, stakeholder consultations. Day one, we have a bunch of companies come and talk to us about their latest. And that has been a really important day to proceed the next day, which is partners. So yes, we welcome that from all sorts of companies. We want to see the innovative solutions. We want to hear the experiences people have had. So yes, very much interested in hearing from companies and seeing what they have to offer. And anyone can reach out to me, and we will add you to the list of private companies that we're including in these stakeholder meetings the day before the partners meet.
Wonderful. Another one, I think this is again from Emanuele. Is storage evaluation framework a theoretical framework on how to evaluate framework, or is it a tool that can be used to assess how much storage is needed vis-a-vis alternative options? Thank you.
Well, the short answer is both. So first of all, it's a framework to consider the role of storage into an increasingly decarbonized, increasingly increasingly supplied from solar and wind power systems. So the system is changing. What is the new role the storage can play? And as part of that, of course, you need to assess what kind of new services or more of such services you already have are needed and how storage can provide those. So it's covering both. It's going from the policy to the regulatory all the way down to the technical and the quantitative.
Great. Let me pick another question. For example, I asked this. Who do you think has the responsibility to develop energy storage? Government, private sector? How can you attract the private investment? Thank you.
This is for me, I guess.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so well, that's a difficult question. It really depends on the policy framework. So there's really two different power system types around the world: the vertically integrated world and the liberalized system. And in these two systems, the answer is different. So the easiest application of the storage valuation framework is for vertically integrated world, where the utility is somehow generating, transmitting, sometimes even distributing and selling electricity, and therefore they are able to capture the whole value of storage directly. So that's a much easier application, because then if the value is higher than the cost, then there should be just incentive to reduce the cost to the customer, and that's the easiest way to apply this framework. In a liberalized world, of course, and this is why we have the project level analysis, that would be the private sector investing and participating into energy and services markets. And in this case, the framework becomes way more complex. Ideally, this would allow to reduce cost, but it needs to be accompanied by the right framework for private sector, first of all, to be developing viable projects, and second of all, to avoid this misallocation that we spoke about. So it's a bit more complex, but the framework tackles the more complex and the more simple configuration of the power system governance as well.
Great. Thank you, Emanuela. I will ask one more question because we are running out of time. Again, more for Emanuele. Would this framework be suitable for analyzing any power system technology providing a variety of services? Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. So the framework for flexibility somehow is above this one. This is a framework for one of the sources of flexibility, which is storage. So in theory, the so-called alternative analysis that I alluded to should be able to capture all sources of flexibility at once, but the framework is tailored for electricity storage. We can have a discussion about other products that IRENA has in the space of flexibility that can address a broader discussion on all sources of flexibility. Given storage is particularly complex from, let's say, its role in the power system, we felt it was necessary to develop a dedicated, more in-depth framework for that. But that doesn't exclude broadening it to other sources of flexibility at the stage of alternative analysis, where a flexibility assessment should define a little bit how much of each services are required.
Thank you, Emanuele. Unfortunately, the time is up. A lot of insightful questions to choose from and learn from both of you, Heather and Emanuele, about the challenges and opportunities in the energy storage space. We got a lot of nice questions, so we tried to follow up on them with the audience. So let me again thank you for the captivating presentation, great answer to your questions, to the questions from audience, and to the audience for very pertinent questions. And we do hope that the insights shared today are of a great value to all of you. Next slide, please. Just a couple of final announcements. So first, to be able to reflect on the delivery of our webinar and ways to improve it, we would appreciate your feedback. We would like to invite you to complete a very short satisfactory survey, which will appear at the end of the webinar and which we will be shared also with you in the follow-up email. We are monitoring your comments and we work on selecting topics of your interest and trying to shift times of webinars to accommodate various time zones. Thank you in advance for completing the survey. And last but not least, we would like to invite you all to our next edition of this webinar series, which will be on the renewables for refugee settlements, sustainable energy access in a humanitarian situation. The webinar will focus on IRENA's report that focuses on assessing energy access in 4 refugee settlements in Iraq and Ethiopia in an attempt to identify ideal renewable energy solutions to reduce diesel consumption and costs, and mostly provide the refugees with clean, renewable, and cost-efficient energy for their everyday lives and purposes. So the webinar will take place in 2 weeks' time on Tuesday, 28th of April at 10 a.m. Central European Time. You can already register on the IRENA website. The link is shared here in the presentation, which you can download in the handouts section, and we will be again shared with you in our follow-up email. Next slide, please. And this is basically all from us for today. Once again, we thank you all for attending this webinar. Goodbye and see you soon.